Well, as Mark Carney is in Washington for a high-stakes conversation with Donald Trump, who better to talk to than a former trade minister for the government of Canada? That's Ed Fast, and he joins us now on Hub Hits.
Good to be on your show, Rudyard.
Excellent, Ed. We appreciate your extensive knowledge as someone who's actually negotiated a couple free trade agreements in their time. What do you think job number one is for Mark Carney in today's meeting? What should he do to begin what will likely be a number of steps, hopefully, towards some kind of reconciliation, some kind of resolution of our trade dispute with the United States?
Well, I think the most important thing going into a negotiation is to understand who you're negotiating with. It is Donald Trump and his team. Donald Trump has made it very clear he's prepared to use economic measures, more specifically tariffs, to basically beat his adversaries and his trading partners into submission to get concessions that they might not normally give up. And if we understand that as the modus operandi, that the president will use any pretexts, whatever is required, to bully his trading partners into submission, that will inform our negotiating strategy going in. And I think it should also provide a high note of caution about what to expect in terms of outcomes.
Right. Now, this president seems to have a very, let's put it charitably, mercurial way of negotiating. It's hot and it's cold. It's on and it's off. How do you, in your experience of having negotiated trade agreements, how do you deal with an interlocutor that is at one moment seemingly serious about a major reset of a trade relationship, and then on the other moment can kind of proverbially pull the rug out from underneath you and seemingly threaten to walk away? How do you begin to narrow, I don't know, what are right now feel like 100-yard lines in terms of the Canada-U.S. position? What are the concrete steps that Mark Carney might be able to take to do that? Do we need to offer a few early concessions to begin that process? I don't know.
I'm not sure offering early concessions is the way to do it. I've got some other ideas on how to position Canada in a way that we actually get a net win for Canada out of this deal. As you know, the president is more of a zero-sum guy. He isn't a big believer in free trade. He doesn't believe in comparative advantage. For him, he has to win, you have to lose. If we understand that's his character and that is his negotiating style, we have to play the long game. Understand, yes, he is mercurial. He's up and down. He'll impose tariffs and back off a little bit. If we play the long game, understanding, A, the Trump administration won't be there forever. So don't lock yourself into a deal that actually is corrosive to our long-term economic interests. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I think we have to understand that at the end of the day, Trump is sensitive to his own political constituency. He has midterm elections coming up. And right now, those midterms don't look like they're going to turn out as well as he would hope. And the last thing he would want is to have his last couple of years of his term emasculated by the fact that he doesn't hold Congress. And so knowing that and going forward, when we deal with tariffs being slapped against Canada, we have the opportunity to engage with the key states and the key industries and the key regions of the United States that truly matter to Trump's electoral prospects, and do so in a very strategic way and secure outcomes, negotiating outcomes that actually reflect the pressure that will continue to build in the U.S.
A lot of what you're saying here makes sense, Ed Fast. I'm speaking with Canada's former trade minister, Ed Fast, about Mark Carney's visit to Washington, Donald Trump today. I guess what I'm trying to figure out, Ed, is how do Canadian decision makers, especially our new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, balance, as you say, I think a very wise strategy of potentially understanding that the midterms out there, 14 odd months away or whatever it is, 18 months away, are going to cause political pressure back on this president. But a lot of uncertainty in Canada regarding the business environment if some kind of terms of trade are not established. And if there's not certainty about the tariffs, whatever level they're at. We're seeing auto closures. Stellantis today announcing that it will furlong employees at its plant for 12 weeks. We've seen more closures in Oshawa. How do you balance this, Ed, between the effects of uncertainty, but at the same time, I think you're right, not wanting to rush into a negotiation because our leverage might in fact be time?
Yes, and that brings me to our broader trade relationship, which has historically always been undergirded by the former NAFTA, which is now CUSMA. And one of the challenges with the negotiation that took place some 5 years ago between the Trudeau government and the Trump administration was they negotiated an agreement that neglected to turn its mind to the enforceability and compliance piece of that agreement and the ability of a president to almost unilaterally, by fiat, withdraw from the agreement. And so I've got some ideas on how the Carney government should now move forward in terms of if they're going to renegotiate CUSMA. Remember that what's supposed to happen next year is a review, not necessarily a renegotiation yet. Somehow this is morphed into a full-scale renegotiation 5 years after we were told that this agreement was going to introduce certainty into our relationship. Yet we have less certainty today than we've ever had before because we have these review clauses that come up every 6 years. We have a president who uses false pretexts to break his word, to abrogate the agreement in many respects, impose tariffs on his largest trading partner. And all of these things have to be addressed in our broader trade relationship. And so I would begin by saying, before you even walk into a CUSMA negotiation, lay the groundwork for how does this agreement become more enforceable?
Right.
The dispute resolution mechanisms have to be much more robust. I believe there needs to be a legislative lock-in that's introduced where on both sides of the border, the new CUSMA 2.0 would be baked into the law of each of our two countries and would require hopefully a supermajority, but certainly a majority of Congress and Parliament to withdraw from the agreement.
Yeah, great.
And if we don't do that, we're going to be subject to these continued imposition of tariffs based on, a false and spurious Section 232 national security pretexts.
Yeah,
which is not what the agreement was ever for.
Yeah, we see the president this week saying that American movies in Hollywood is now a national security issue. Final question, Ed Fast. If we think into the future, the period of this negotiation, what are your thoughts about us making an opportunity, making some lemonade out of the lemons? In other words, is there an opportunity here to modernize our economy in ways, to deal with some of these less than competitive parts of the Canadian economy, which have arguably held back economic growth, prosperity, and development, and position these politically inside Canada, yes, as concessions to the Americans, but concessions in which we get something in return, maybe certainty about the future of a free trade agreement, as you've said, bound into legislation or a more robust method of conflict resolution. Can we, Ed, should we be thinking of this negotiation as something bigger, a reworking of the Canadian economy itself, or do you think the country's not ready for that and that's just not how these things operate in practice, given your experience with free trade agreements?
Well, I'm not going to suggest that it's going to be politically easy, but I am on record as saying that this renegotiation of CUSMA may very well force us to do things that we should have done ourselves many, many years ago. And as Mark Carney enters this negotiation, he does need to be resolute. He needs to have a spine. However, he cannot be rigid. And if we're simply so rigid that we say, listen, all of our sacred cows we're going to continue to protect, and we're not going to give on any of that. For example, the protected industries like telecoms and the airline industry and some of the prudential measures in our banking industry and agriculture, and it goes on and on. There are many areas of our bilateral relationship and our own economic growth agenda, such as it is, that have left us far behind. We no longer have fiscal capacity to respond to these global shocks. We no longer have the competitiveness or the productivity within our economy to be able to guarantee the prosperity that we've promised future generations of Canadians. And so I'm hoping that this renegotiation of our relationship with the U.S. will actually lead to some of these fundamental, substantive reforms within our own economy that will allow us now to take advantage of some of our strengths. And one of the other things I would do, and I would warn the Prime Minister of this, if you go into this and do a very narrow negotiation on CUSMA itself, we're going to lose. It could end up being a shipwreck, because the first CUSMA negotiation, I challenge you, Rudyard, to find a substantive concession that the U.S. made in those negotiations. The concessions were all on our side. This is an asymmetrical relationship. They're the big guy, they're the elephant, we're the mouse sleeping next to the elephant. The reality is that our negotiations could end up going very poorly if we have a very narrow focus on just CUSMA itself. But if we broaden out our discussions, not necessarily broaden out CUSMA, but broaden out our discussions to include the waterfront of outstanding issues between our two countries, and there are many, as you know, it now provides us with trade-offs we can make to actually secure a great outcome for Canada. I mean, we have so much to offer the U.S., specifically on issues like energy security. When we talk about critical mineral security and the role critical minerals play in the defense industry and in EVs and so much more in terms of advanced manufacturing. When we talk about food security and potash, and it goes on and on. There are things that we can offer the U.S. that allow us to secure an outcome here that would never be possible if we just focus narrowly on CUSMA.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ed Fast, former federal trade minister with the government of Canada. Really appreciate your insights and analysis today. And people can grab Ed's latest thinking on the Hub website. It's up live on our website, www.thehub.ca. You can see that article right now. Ed writing, Mark Carney's first major test is here, negotiating with Donald Trump. Mr. Fast, thank you so much again for coming on the program.
You're welcome, Roger.
That's today's edition of Hub Hits. We hope you enjoyed this check-in with Ed Fast. Again, head over to the website. Check out his article. Lots of interesting analysis and insight on this high-stake meeting taking place for Mark Carney today in the White House. Until the next edition of Hub Hits, bye-bye.